All right, welcome back. Talking about the Steelers winners the other night, 30-20 over Tampa. They got Kansas City coming up through, and of course, a turbulent week. We'll see how it impacts what happens throughout the week. But Chris, I'll start with you on this one. Quarterback. Now, Dobbs and Rudolph both played well, but if you had to guess who would be the number 2 this year behind Ben Roethlisberger, who would it be?
I've got to believe it's going to be Mason Rudolph, in part because of what they said about him when they drafted him. If you have a first-round grade on a guy and you have him fall into your lap into the third round, well, I would think that he has to be it then. It's one of those situations where, yeah, it's a competition, but it's a weighted competition, and there's an obvious hope on the part of the front office, coaching staff, GM, that Mason Rudolph seizes this. That's not a knock on Josh Dobbs. They both did play pretty well, but I think they clearly believe that Mason Rudolph has the higher ceiling, kind of fits what they would want to do better, and Josh Dobbs can always go to NASA, so who knows if his head's going to be in it that much longer.
Yeah, unfortunately right now he's only the second smartest guy on the team after the backup place kicker, right? But, you know, if I'm Josh Dobbs, I've got to be very happy with what has been advanced in my career here. I didn't think that he would even have an opportunity to put on tape what he has over 2 years. Maybe he's done enough that he can stay in the NFL for a while, if not here, then elsewhere. But if it's not Mason Rudolph who's the backup this year, then something's gone wrong in their analysis to have taken Rudolph in front of Dobbs last year. And I do think that Rudolph has made progress from what I've seen up in Latrobe, and I do think from what we saw in that game on the first preseason night against Tampa Bay, his footwork looks a little bit more nimble, he looks a little quicker, and I think I see a little bit more poise and calm in the pocket, too.
I don't know what the mystery is. I mean, Des Bryant declared him a starter, an NFL starter. So
Hello,
I mean, it's got to be
State Cowboy.
Well, yeah, it's got to be Mason Rudolph, right? I mean, again, to Tim's point, the Steelers wouldn't have used the draft choice that they did on Mason Rudolph, knowing what they did the year before with Josh Dobbs. They wouldn't have picked Mason Rudolph if the plan wasn't for him to be the starter. So I have the backup. So I have there's no question in my mind that unless he is absolutely terrible, which he wasn't the other night, he'll be the backup.
Yeah, but Bob, I heard your show over the weekend. We're forgetting about Duck. I mean, I heard you were taking Duck Dynasty calls in your show.
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously this guy's going to supplant Roethlisberger, right?
Is Devlin Hodges the new, like, R.J. Bowers of this camp?
Absolutely.
Where does he slot in the camp phenom rankings?
What about Kuhn? Remember him?
Oh,
He came out of nowhere. And
well, he actually made a career out of himself.
I know he
for
did.
sure.
Hey, you never know. They like him, so all we know. But, all right, now you threw me off what I was going to ask you, Tim. But
Quack, quack.
I wanted to ask you about James Washington because he looked good, but he looked good last August also. I went back and looked at some of the stuff from last year, and then he couldn't translate in the regular season. Do you see a different James Washington, and do you think he can be the man to beat out Deontay Johnson as the number 3 if Moncrief's is number 2, or can he go all the way up to number 2?
As you were saying, Bob, he was pretty good last year at this stage of the season, and there was reason to believe that he's going to contribute more than he did last year. So the nuanced difference, I guess, that maybe you can pin to is just he looks more flexible, quicker, the weight loss. He's getting open on his own more so than the route getting open. I think that there's reason to hope that he can contribute now, perhaps with the elevated responsibility.
I think he could just be some case as simple as he's a guy who has more confidence because he did come on a little bit at the end of last year. He struck me as almost like, in a good way, a boring guy, kind of just does his thing and doesn't want to be bothered too much, doesn't want his name out there. And really, he doesn't have to be like there's Juju, and then there's guys who are going to fill roles, slot receivers. And James Washington, to be worth it to the Steelers, simply has to be good enough to be a guy that Ben Roethlisberger trusts a handful of times a game to take a shot downfield with, because that's one of the big things that he does well. Maybe the thing he does the best is go and make those combat catches way down the sidelines. He stretches the field for them. He's doing his job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, obviously the second year, that's a big deal, going from your first year to your second year. He's got experience. He's a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. I expect him I'm not saying he's going to have 100 catches or something, but I expect him to have a good season for them and contribute.
Yeah, Bob, you called the game. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but, he did have the touchdown where he couldn't quite get his foot in, but he made a really good effort there. I don't think that was a perfectly thrown ball. And didn't he also have another opportunity where it was open, where I think it was still Dobbs who was in who missed him?
He did.
So his night could have been even better if you factor in those two.
I mean, even if Dobbs hits him in stride on that deep ball that they did complete, that's probably a touchdown.
Yeah, there you go. That's another example.
Longer game.
Right.
He had to come back for it a little.
Real quick, Devin Bush, real deal or not? And I know he's going to eventually, but do you think right now he can be the guy to come in there, start, and become, we've seen guys go from first-year rookies to Pro Bowl status. Can he do that?
Yeah, I think that the athleticism really showed, and where he really helped them, I thought, in those first 2 series that he was out there is he went sideline to sideline after catches were made and helped get the ball carrier down, assisted on tackles, prevented a guy from shaking loose and turning it into a big game where maybe last year John Bostic doesn't. He still needs to drop in coverage a little bit better, by his own admission. I think that'll come with experience, though. I have high hopes for Bush.
I think he's definitely going to be somewhat of an impact player, but he's a rookie. I mean, he's going to make mistakes. There's going to be some growing pains. And the thing about him, the best thing about him, though, is his explosiveness and his athleticism. And like Tim said, sideline to sideline, he's going to clean up a lot of mess. And he's also going to be able to make up for like a mistake, say he runs to the wrong place. He's quick enough to be able to recover. So I do think he'll have a good season. I don't know if I'm going to predict a Pro Bowl for him.
He's going to be the day one starter. He better be. And I think he's going to be the best player of their yeah, he's going to be the better of the two inside linebackers, I think. This should just be Mark Barron versus Vince Williams for the other spot, and frankly, that shouldn't be much of a contest either. Vince Williams should be relegated to a pretty situational role if they need to go heavy and try to, get a stick in the middle on a running down or an obvious running situation. But what I saw from Devin Bush was pretty much what they had with Ryan Shazier, a guy who can fly around the football field and make instinctive plays. And I thought it was telling on something Ed Bouchette wrote that when Bush was asked about a particular play, he said, honestly, in the moment, you just try to diagnose and go, and you're not really thinking about it beyond that.
Yeah, that was the 4th and 1 that he stopped.
That is what I want to hear. A guy who is, now granted, he's going to get sucked in on play action, I'm sure, here and there. But you know what? I want somebody who's just running downhill in that particular instance and trying to lay a helmet on somebody.
Boy, did he. When we come back, Antonio Brown is up to more interesting stuff. And does the media that supported Brown in this little battle with Ben Roethlisberger, do they owe Ben an apology? We'll talk about it next, right here on the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown.